to Inside the Pylon, your Midwest college football podcast, joined as always by Clinton Boring. I am Ryan Satkoviak. Clinton, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. I apologize to all the listeners if there's a random sneeze, sniffle, or anything along the lines of a cold, as my children have been battling some sickness all weekend, and I think I've got a tad bit of it. So I will mute it as soon as I can, if possible, to avoid the noise. But otherwise, I'm good. I'm excited to talk Iowa and Michigan State tonight.
Clinton's running the snot locker over there. So we are not going live tonight for that exact reason, just in case Clinton gets pulled away for child duty. Usually, though, you can find us live on YouTube on Monday and Thursday evening during the off season at our YouTube channel at ITPCFB. Same place you can find us on Twitter or Instagram. Give us a follow, give us a shout there. You can interact with us on the socials. Had some interaction over the weekend. That was a lot of fun. Clinton's been putting a lot of work in on that. If you prefer not to follow along live on YouTube and just want to catch us in the morning for your early commute while you're going through emails at work, what have you, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast at Inside the Pylon. On the platforms, give us a rating and a review if you feel so inclined. Helps us grow the show, and it'd be much appreciated. And as Clinton mentioned, tonight we are continuing our spring overview series. Tonight, talking about the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Michigan State Spartans. Clinton, two coaches on the complete opposite ends of the tenured spectrum, with Kurt Ferentz entering his 26th season at the helm of the Hawkeyes, and Jonathan Smith, obviously the new head coach with the Michigan State Spartans. But we will start with Iowa tonight. What a fascinating year it was for Iowa last year. They've caught a lot of strays from us on this podcast already, intentionally, unintentionally, whatever. But they've also caught a lot of strays from just about everyone in the college football world with the drive to 325 last year. Yes, the 325 points, 25 points per game that they needed to hit for then offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz to retain his job, which they famously could not even hit. Even that small bar was not attainable for the Hawkeyes last year. Despite the offensive ineptitude, however, they rolled through a 10-2 regular season and were I would say, phantom penalty call on Cooper DeJean on a punt return away from being 11-1 in the regular season last year. But then they got a little bit of dose of reality in the postseason, getting shut out by both Michigan and Tennessee in the Big Ten title game, and then in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl to close out the season. Still, a 10-4 season for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Kurt Ferentz has that program pretty consistently in that 8 to 10 win range here over the last 8-9 years. They're one of the more consistent programs in the country, and I think that might be, normally when you say that, Clinton, that sounds like a good thing, but I think for Hawkeyes fans, it's been kind of stagnant for them. It seems like it's the same story every year. One of the best defenses, one of the best special teams units in the country, yet they're consistently held back by, and we're not even talking about just a bad offense. We are talking about among the worst offensive units in the country. 15.4 points per game last year was 132nd in the country. There are only 133 FBS teams. 334 yards per game, dead last in the country. Their yards per play, 3.9. No one else in the country.
Oh my gosh!
No one else in the country was under 4.3. They were almost half a yard per play worse than anyone else in the country. 130th in yards per game passing, 109th in yards per game rushing, 119th in yards per carry. Their 59.6 plays per game was 129th in the country. Their 29.4% third down conversion was 125th in the country. Red zone scoring, they were 90th in the country. That looks like a bright spot, maybe, but they only had 35 attempts, and of those 35 attempts, only 14 of them went for touchdowns. That is one red zone touchdown per game last year. That is truly, truly atrocious. And yet, despite that, Clinton, they were a double-digit win team last year. So kind of kick us off here. I know I kind of took the reins on Iowa, but I want to get your thoughts a little bit before we dig in a little bit more on the individual production here. Your general thoughts on Iowa last year and things that you're kind of looking at them for this year.
Well, they say defense wins championships. However, in Iowa's case, defense just carries you to a championship and not anywhere else. I mean, there were years past where Iowa's defense was scoring more points per game than their offense was. I think it was 2 years ago. They were getting like pick sixes left and right.
Yep.
And that's not a great recipe for success. We alluded to this earlier, I think in our tier episode. If Iowa could ever find an offense, they have the defense that can get them in the playoff. Now, they'd take a really good offense on their part to contend for a national championship, but I don't know. Last year, the Big Ten West just, never put a product on the field in the Big Ten championship that would ever really compete against the Big Ten East team, at least for more than a half. Those Iowa teams that made it were plenty good enough to win those games if they just had an offense. So I think kind of what my thought for this year is hopeful. I'm hopeful that with Brian Ferentz gone and Tim Lester now coming in, that we can start to open up the offense. I wonder if the problem, though, is if this is going to be more than a first-year success. He's going to need some time here to get some players in or make some adjustments here to fit his offense. But Lester, he's a pretty solid track record. He was head coach at Western Michigan from 2017 to 2022, with 37 wins there. And his offense ranked in the top 35 nationally in total offense for 4 consecutive seasons. So that is light years ahead of what Iowa was able to do. But being tasked to remodel one of the worst offenses in the country is pretty steep. And then, starting with your quarterback, who's likely going to be your starter, and McNamara coming off a season-ending ACL surgery in 23 and likely not to be ready till summer, is not the best way to start off a tenure. So I expect better for Illinois, goodness sakes. I expect better for Iowa in 2024. I just don't know how much better on offense.
So you brought up a really interesting point there about kind of the Big Ten West and their just overall inability to compete with that Big Ten East once you got to the Big Ten title game. And I think Iowa is going to be a really interesting case study because I feel like a lot of the conversation last year around Ohio State and Michigan, particularly midseason, was, well, these two teams have incredibly good defenses, but they're playing just absolutely god-awful offenses. So how good are they actually? And then you saw, Michigan obviously rolls through the playoff, beating Alabama and one of the best offenses in the country in Washington in very convincing fashion. So they certainly proved their mettle. And then you look at Ohio State's defense when they got to the Fiesta Bowl. Why am I blanking on that?
Against Missouri?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I almost said the Alamo Bowl. It was a Peach Bowl. Pretty sure Peach was in Dallas, right? They play that in Dallas.
Oh, the Cotton Bowl.
Cotton Bowl. There we go.
Jesus,
Good Lord.
That
was an O for on both of us.
Yeah, that was bad. In my defense, I've been completely thrown off kilter the last week with my schedule. But anyway, there just absolutely no offensive production in that game. The defense was on the field almost the entire game, and they still shut down an incredibly explosive Missouri offense for 3.5 quarters until they got a late touchdown. So those teams came out and they kind of proved themselves. And with Iowa, it's kind of one of those things that you question, was their defense as good as the statistics say last year, or did they benefit from playing a horrendous Big Ten West schedule from an offensive standpoint? I shouldn't say the Big Ten West in general was horrendous, not that it's anything to write home about, but not exactly a division that's traditionally been known for its offense. But then, you look at kind of some of the bigger teams that they played, and again, not that Penn State had a fantastic offense last year, but they more or less shut them down. And Penn State got some points on the board again because Iowa's defense was consistently put in short fields and was on the field for most of the game because their offense could not sustain drives at all. And then in the Big Ten title game, same thing with Michigan. They get a long, I don't remember if it was a kick return or a punt return that takes them down inside the red zone. I think Michigan had another drive that basically started inside the Iowa red zone. So, they hold them to 23, 24 points. And even then, Michigan had to fight for that. So this was an exceptional defense last year, regardless of the competition that they played. And I know we talked about it a little bit in the tier episode, and we've alluded to it a couple more times, man. If we're just talking about a below average Iowa offense, I'm not even asking for mediocre here, but a below average Iowa offense, they absolutely beat Minnesota last year. And I'd venture a guess that they give Penn State a much more competitive game. I'm not going to sit here and say that they would have beat Michigan in the Big Ten title game, but they might have made it more exciting. And then you're looking at this defense that they had last year. Obviously, the big loss was Cooper DeJean at the cornerback position. 41 tackles last year, only 2 interceptions and 5 pass breakups. But he's one of those guys who's one of those shutdown corners that you're not throwing at him a lot. So when I'm looking at a guy like that, I'm not expecting there to be these huge pass breakup statistics. You lose Joe Evans, their leading sack getter last year with 9.5 and 13.5 tackles for a loss. Defensive lineman Logan Lee also moving on. He had 55 tackles last year, including 5.5 for a loss and 3 sacks. But pretty much everyone else of note on the defense is coming back. Jay Higgins leads the team with 171 tackles last year at the linebacker position. He's back. Linebacker Nick Jackson with 110 tackles last year. He's back. Defensive backs Sebastian Castro and Quinn Schulte are back. On the defensive line, you also got Yaya Black coming back. Ethan Herkett coming back. Yeah. Deontay Craig coming back. At the safety position, Xavier Nwangpa's coming back. They are bringing back more or less the entire crew from last year.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at their top. I'm looking at their top 10 tacklers from last year, and it looks like they got 8 of them coming back. There's just fantastic production that's returning. They're bringing back most of, aside from Evans and Logan Lee, their top 10 tackles for a loss guys from last year coming back. There's just a ton of production that's coming back on a defense that was already phenomenal last year. And with defensive coordinator Phil Parker having that kind of experience coming back, that he's going to draw some more stuff for them this year. And they're going to be even, I would venture a guess, probably even more dominant than they already were last year, which is saying something because we're talking about, from a scoring defense, 4th in the country, from total defense, 7th in the country, 1st in the country in yards per play allowed. It's just a fantastic defense last year that only, we talked about Iowa's offense only get to the red zone 35 times last year. Their defense only allowed 33 red zone attempts against last year. 15 touchdowns and 10 field goals. Just a fantastic defense last year, Clinton.
Well, they also, overall, they had 33 team sacks and 10 interceptions. So, again, that'll certainly boost your movement there. The other thing that you're going to add to that defense is now they have a new punter, Reese Docken, who is an Australian punter. So he has to follow up Torrey Taylor. So we'll see if he can live up to the legendary status. But yeah, as you mentioned, 8 starters returned from last season, including that Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson to anchor the defense there in the middle, who both, from what I was reading, could have easily made the jump to the NFL but opted to come back. So you have some really good leadership. I would say you're looking at those two for sure as the next 2 Iowa names to be called on the NFL draft next year. Note Joe Evans, I think I was reading about him, 9.5 sacks, and I believe he went undrafted. He was signed by the Baltimore Ravens. So that's kind of crazy, a guy that puts up that kind of stats. You might dominate in college, but just showing that the NFL may not love you. But you literally hit every point that I had noted that I was going to talk about on the defense there, essentially everything they're bringing back. So I really look for another stout Iowa defense that's going to keep them in pretty much every game. One caveat that I was going to bring up when you mentioned the scores last year, their defense only gave up more than 30 points. We're excluding the bowl game here. Only once. It was Penn State, 31-0. Even Michigan was only 26 points. With an inept offense and the amount of time that defense had to be on the field, it's amazing how they just, again, shut people down. They don't let you score. And kudos to Iowa's defensive staff and the players to do that, because your offense has been beyond horrendous for these past few years. And obviously that's where they got to change. So I was kind of looking at Lester's offense. They've been working in some shotgun during the spring and during their spring game, even though they didn't call it a spring game. So nice of them to kind of join the times of new football and put in some shotgun in there instead of just under the center and maybe some pistol all the time. They do return their top 3 running backs on the offense, so they'll have something stable there for whatever they have come at quarterback. They have LaShawn Williams, Caleb Johnson, and Jazuin Patterson. Williams had 821 yards, 1 touchdown. Johnson, 463 and 3 touchdowns. Patterson, 206, 2 touchdowns last year. So a lot of yards coming back. The other guy that's a main staple in their offense, who's getting a lot of look as the top tight end in the 2025 NFL draft, is Luke Lachey. who came off a season-ending leg injury last year as well. And then Caleb Brown, one of their returning leaders in receivings, coming back 22 for 215 and 1 touchdown last year. If people remember his name, he came from Ohio State. Last year was his first year with Iowa. And then I believe it is another tight end, Addison Ostrenga, 31 for 192 and 2 TDs last year. So this is interesting, though. Eric All was still the leading receiver on the team last year, and he only played 7 games, 21 for 299 and 3 touchdowns. Your leading receiver wasn't over 300 yards. You have set offense back a millennia, Iowa. Like, my gosh. And props to Eric All. Everything I've heard about this guy since he's been drafted by the Bengals is when he's healthy, he's George Kittle. I'm like, golly gee, I'm pretty damn pumped about that if that's running out on Sundays for my favorite team. But it just goes to show you, like, I don't know what Brian Ferentz's issue was. I don't know if Kirk steps too much in with his offense or Brian just got the job because dad was there. I don't know. But 299 yards for your leading receivers, unacceptable. So that kind of brought my fun trivia question today for you, Ryan, was,
oh boy,
what year was Iowa's last 1,000-yard receiver? And can you name that receiver without Googling anything? Can you give me the year first, and then we'll see if we can go with the receiver.
So are we talking like last person to have 1,000 yards, or are we specifically talking about a wide receiver who had 1,000 yards?
It is including tight ends, tight end and wide receiver.
I'm going to say 2015.
Close. 2011. 13 years ago, folks, since Iowa has had a 1,000-yard receiver. It literally took me 5 minutes flipping through this page of stats to get through 13 seasons and find the 1,000-yard receiver. So I'm going to guess, do you have any shots at the name, Ryan, if you're up on your Iowa history?
Don't even have a guess.
Marvin McNutt. In 2011, he had 1,315 yards of offense or for receiving that year. I believe like Fant and some of the other tight ends that have been there and been in the 700s.
Yeah, it's just hard for a tight end to get 1,000 yards.
But just 700. My gosh, like you're feeding the dude. Was it Hawkinson was with Fant? I think Hawkinson had like 760 and Fant had almost 500 the year they were together in that big year. Just insane, man. And then I'm blanking on his name. He just went to the Lions last year. Laporta. Yeah. Laporta, I think, might have had a 600 or 700 yard season in there too. But Iowa, you got to get with the times, man. It's just you got to develop a passing game.
Well, so
they do.
Let's kind of build off of that there. So kind of listening to some of the stuff coming out of Iowa spring practices, it sounds like, I mean, you touched on running out of the shotgun a little bit more. It sounds like they're actually doing motion now. They're trying to confuse the defense. Again, a novel concept. Welcome to 2024. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like some of the hearing some of the defensive guys talk, they're saying, hey, we're not entirely sure what they're running now, which, if your own team knows what you're running, the other team knows what you're running too. So that's going to be fascinating to see kind of how this plays out for Iowa this year running. And, and it's not even like, man, we're not even sitting here saying like, you need to run an offense like Washington did last year where you're going 5 wide, 4 receivers and a tight end spreading the field, chucking the ball 50 times a game. But my God, man, you're not even running motion plays. You're just lining up and going right at teams, and you think that that's going to get the job done with the amount of analysts all these programs have now and the advanced scouting that's able to go on just by watching game film? Come on now. So in fairness to Iowa, it feels like they put a lot of chips in the Cade McNamara basket last year, and he made it 5 games before an ACL tear. Not that he was exactly lighting the world on fire beforehand, but you go to Deacon Hill, who just, was kind of thrown to the fire there, did not look ready at all. And if, Cade McNamara who is a Big Ten championship winning quarterback, mind you, we're not talking about a scrub here. You can say what you will about his game-breaking ability. I'm not here to have that conversation. He's a very good and accomplished quarterback. If that guy didn't look prepared to run your offense, that the backup was not going to be prepared as well. And he did what he could. It wasn't great. And now he's out the door into the transfer portal. So A lot of what I've heard, I think it was Scott Docterman from The Athletic on the Until Saturday podcast was talking about how Iowa's looking for another quarterback in the portal. Maybe to give Cade McNamara a little bit of a run in summer ball, but mostly just for insurance, because I think Cade's the only other scholarship quarterback on the roster right now. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. But
I think there's a young freshman maybe on there.
That would make sense. But a couple of guys who have either reported Iowa offers or who have visited Iowa recently. Northwestern transfer QB Brendan Sullivan is reportedly going to Iowa City tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this, for a visit. And they've also been in contact with Oklahoma transfer quarterback General Booty. Just wanted to
bring in the booty.
Just wanted to get a General Booty reference in on this episode. So to Iowa's credit, they see where their deficiencies lie, and they're trying to go after it. Again, we're not talking about world beaters here. It's not like we're getting Michael Penix out of the portal or anything. But, when Michael Penix transferred to Washington, he wasn't exactly the Michael Penix who just went 8th overall. So you never know how these things play out. But it's good to see them, one, getting with the times a little bit on offense, and then two, knowing that, hey, we need to be better at the quarterback position. And, maybe Cade's still our guy, but we also need to make sure that we have a better insurance policy in case he actually is not our guy.
Yeah. Sullivan heard that Northwestern was going to have to play by a lake on their practice field, and he's like, deuces, I'm playing in a real stadium. I'm leaving you.
Yes, because if he does come to Iowa this year when they play Northwestern, it would be in Iowa City, so he wouldn't have the opportunity to
play in a stadium.
Home.
Absolutely. Another just good note, though, for a positive for Iowa's offense, they're bringing 4 offensive linemen back for 2024. So you've only got to replace one. So that's a really good starting point for Leicester. Is you've got returning running backs and you got an offensive line that you can rely on. Excuse me. And then what can you get out of receivers? I think tight end's going to be fine. It's really just your quarterback. I did want to note, your Caden Proctor would have been your 5th offensive lineman for 2024, but his appearance lasted about as long as an Iowa offensive drive before he re-entered the portal. And it sounds like has it been confirmed? Is he going back to Bama?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed.
Okay. All right. So the other last question I really had about Iowa for you, Ryan, we briefly brought it up before, but who has the bigger improvement in 2024? Iowa's offense or USC's defense?
I'm going to go with Iowa's offense. Just looking kind of at their schedule here, Again, there's not a lot on this schedule that would scare me if I was an Iowa fan. I mean, you're going to the Horseshoe playing Ohio State. That's probably going to be pretty scary for sure. But you're looking at the non-conference. I mean, should be wins against Illinois State and Troy. I think that Iowa State game is going to be a little tricky, but you get it at home. Iowa State took a little bit of a step forward. Last year, they got a good young quarterback, so that could be challenging. But then, you're going to Minnesota. That's not really scary. You're hosting Washington. Again, don't really know what they're going to be. We talked a little bit about them last week. I could see a wide range of outcomes from that game. You're going to Michigan State. We're going to talk about them a little bit next year. But then, Northwestern, should be winnable. Wisconsin, definitely winnable. At UCLA, going to be more Iowa fans there than UCLA fans. That's not scary. At Maryland, well, that game's in November. That's not necessarily scary. And then Nebraska to close the year. And I mean, that could be, depending on how the Huskers gel as the season comes along. Yeah, that could possibly be the second toughest game on the schedule. But again, I mean, this Iowa schedule this past year was not very daunting. They went 10-2. This Iowa schedule next year, again, not very daunting. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the schedule. I'm thinking, 10-2 is probably a likely outcome. I could even see 11-1. You could talk me into 11-1 on this schedule. So, given what they're kind of going against, I'm going to go with the Iowa offense.
Yeah, I think I concur. I think I was going to say the USC defense. Listen, both were historically bad. You theoretically are rock bottom. You can't get any worse. But I think it's time we're going to see enough of an Iowa offense this year improvement that help them, quite honestly, have more confidence in them to do that, especially with their schedule and USC having a little bit of a tougher schedule that they're going to play. But, man, can you look at this year one, Iowa? I mean, 10-2, 11-1 is certain. You're going to dang near be in the play. I mean, 11-1, you're in the playoff because you're going to be in the Big Ten championship most likely.
Mhm.
But 10-2, like, wow, that would make for really interesting to kind of see what else happens, to see how many Big Ten teams are pushing to get in the playoff.
Yeah, I really
So,
need to look up what the tiebreaker is for who gets into the Big Ten title game. Because if Iowa's sitting here at 11-1, I mean, they wouldn't have it over
mhm,
Ohio State because I'm just going to assume that the loss there would be to Ohio State. But
yeah.
I don't know how it plays out if we're talking teams that have not played each other. If it's like a combined record of common opponents or something, I should probably look this up.
I think what it was last year when they started talking about a three-way tie with Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State was its combined component of record. So whoever
I
has the
gotcha.
stronger opponent record gets it. Because they were talking how Penn State last year, they had a little bit, their opponents had the better win-loss record, so it would have trumped what Ohio State and Michigan ended up having.
So it looks
I
like
think.
they have not decided what it is yet. I have
Okay.
a
Is that? I assume that's now because of the expanded, where there's no
correct, yes.
divisions now. So
Yeah, so an article today from the San Jose Mercury News, and I think this this might be just an AP stock story. The Big Ten football has crap, I just got paywall. Hold on. Hold on. Let's
pay up.
well
Nothing's
I was
free.
rolling. No, I was rolling through it there. Okay. The Big Ten football has a math problem to resolve before it becomes a math calamity. How do you break ties in a league with 18 teams, 9 conference games, and no divisions? And Big Ten COO Kerry Kenny said, we have to reinvent what we had. What we had was based on divisions, and now I can't see the rest of the quote. So it sounds like nobody knows what the tiebreaker is going to be yet. Or if they do, it's somewhere at the bottom of this paywall article, and I can't figure it out. So that's good. I feel a little less stupid now than I did 15 seconds ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting season. This is why I love the Big Ten. When you have a team like Iowa who puts out no offense and can consistently compete for a Big Ten championship. So it's going to be really fun. So we'll see how that goes for them.
And now let's hit the other end of the spectrum, a team that did not have as successful of a season last year. The Michigan State Spartans, 4-8 overall, 2-7 in Big Ten play. A remarkably tumultuous season in East Lansing with then head coach Mel Tucker and everything going on around him. We don't need to rehash that at all today. But boy, were they bad last year, Clinton.
Mm-hmm. This was I kind of bounced around when we did our team preview sheet and dove into all their stats or the content sheet that we made. And Michigan State was one of my early ones. And I had to read over the numbers multiple times. I'm like, they could not have been this bad. Just thinking back to a few years ago, what they had with Kenneth Walker and how good Michigan State was and Mel Tucker. I think the problem was, and Ryan Day kind of made a point of this a couple of years ago, was that Michigan State was living pretty hard in the portal. And it's hard to consistently build a team from the portal. And that's what Tucker was known for. And then, of course, he got the massive contract after one good year, and then poo-poo Kachu out the door that went. So you mentioned the 4-8, 2-7. Mel Tucker was actually 2-0 before he was fired. And then, or they mutually parted ways, however you want to see that. And then Harlan Barnett was their interim, and he finished 2-8. So now we bring in Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. Great hire. He had his overall record with Oregon State was 34-35. He spent his last 6 seasons there. But his past 3 seasons were 7-6. This was starting in 21-22. 7-6, 10-3, and then 8-5. And last year, even that 8-5 is kind of deceiving because we all know the Pac-12 was the best they've been as a conference in years. Of course, their swan song, they give us the best season they've had in years. So really tough conference for him to go through. I personally am really excited about Jonathan Smith coming into Michigan State. We'll get into kind of the players and stuff that he's brought in, but I'm already looking at the offense from last year and how he's going to help improve that. Again, points per game last year, 15.9, 131st out of 133, 289.3 yards per game, which is 129th. Their third down conversion percentage was 28.95%. Folks, they couldn't even get over 30%. That is horrendous. Yikes. They were 127th. And then in the red zone, they weren't horrible in the red zone when they actually got there. 85.71% of the time, which was 53rd. However, when you're only scoring about 16 points per game, that's really not going to make a difference. So my kind of two early questions for you, Ryan, is your thoughts on the Jonathan Smith hire for Michigan State. And then if the Pac-12 wouldn't have dissolved, do you think Jonathan Smith would have taken this job?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I think he's an Oregon State guy, right? He played quarterback there late 90s, early 2000s. And I get that, like, everybody has a price, and at a certain point, the allure of a bigger job is going to come calling, especially when you're at a place like Oregon State, where even though you're in a power conference, I mean, you're still kind of that middle tier of a weaker power conference. But I feel, and maybe I'm wrong in this, and this goes back to a conversation that we've had, I feel like multiple times on this podcast already, is it better to be the top dog in a crappy conference, or would you rather be kind of in that kind of lower middle class at one of these Big Ten or SEC jobs, when you're going to be making a lot more money, you're going to have a lot more resources, both from a recruiting department and an assistant coaching salary pool standpoint. And I feel like that would have been kind of a fascinating case study to see if what he would have said had the Pac-12 not completely. And it's not even that the Pac-12 disintegrated; it's that Oregon State just got left out in the cold.
Yeah,
we're not talking about like Utah, where they landed on their feet in the Big 12 at least, but their Oregon State went from power conference to mid-major team overnight. Yep. And you're sitting there as a coach who just, in like we kind of talked about a couple weeks ago too with Matt Campbell, like, this is a guy who knew that the iron was hot for him right now, and he took advantage of it.
He struck at the right time.
Yep, his stock is I'm not going to say it's as high as it's ever going to be, because he comes in here and he does great, then it's only going to go up. But I mean, he saw where things were going with Oregon State, and he had to know that, boy, this is going one way and it's not uphill here. So he got out when he could, and it probably wasn't the easiest decision to leave your alma mater, but that is the epitome of a business decision, saying, hey man, I can't stick around for this stuff, guys. I'm sorry, but I got to do what's best for me.
And jump off the ship and just follow me, though. Follow me to East Lansing.
Well, yeah, and then he took half his team with him, which, I mean, that is what it is. But, I mean, and he went to a place that you can have success. I mean, we're not talking about Kurt Cignetti at Indiana, where if he has success there, he'd be the first one to do it. We're talking about a team that, just a couple years ago was in a New Year's Six Bowl. We're talking about a team that within the last that made the playoff in the 14 era.
2015. Yep.
They have one more playoff appearance than Penn State does.
Yep.
Like, they have one more playoff appearance than USC does. I mean, This is a place you can have success. I mean, I know that there's kind of this stigma around Michigan State that, you're the second team in your own state, but come on now, you can win here. People have done it before. It's been done by multiple coaches.
Yep. I think something, well, I mean, you just alluded to it. They've won in the past. That was my kind of thought. Like, if Smith does well here, and let's say Ohio State isn't available, USC's not available, and let's say Michigan's not, where else would you go? Like, you just said the point there. Michigan State's been to a playoff. Penn State hasn't. Mm-hmm. So I guess historically Penn State's probably the bigger program. If you're winning at Michigan State, they've shown you they're going to pay you money to keep you there. My God, if you pay Mel Tucker off 1 year, if Jonathan Smith can show you 2 or 3 consistent years, you're going to pay him the money to stay there. And you could put this, Michigan State is a nationally well-known team. Mm-hmm. Exactly to your point, like Cignetti at Indiana. Like, this doesn't have to be a stepping stone job. It could be. At this point, we don't know what's going to happen down the road with ACC Big 12, and my hope is that they stick around. But this whole 2-team super conference idea continues to gain traction. But regardless, I don't think he'd make a move to the ACC or Big 12, not when the Big 10 is going to make all this TV money and Michigan State's going to fork up the cash to pay him. So, I don't know. Like, it's a fairly attractive job for him to stay there if he puts them on the map and keeps them going.
I think that Mel Tucker point, you kind of hit that's a really good point that I hadn't really considered. And this is kind of, I think, the conversation that a lot of people were having with Texas A&M when they fired Jimbo Fisher. People saying, well, why would you want to go there? It just sounds like dysfunction. Well, they've shown you that if you have even a modicum of success there, that they're going to give you a boatload of money, that they're going to give you it all because they're going to put a gigantic buyout into it because they're afraid that you're going to leave. I mean, Mel Tucker had, like, how far was he into 2021 before? Did they even get to the end of the year before they gave him that contract?
I feel like...
Or was it after the Michigan game when they beat him?
I don't know. I'm not for sure on that.
So,
it might have occurred during the season.
But
because
way,
I think we might have laughed at it because they got like walled by Ohio State like 49-0 or something, and we might have laughed about that. Like you go into the actual biggest test of your year and you get smacked after you got $9 million.
The week after they played Michigan, they lost to Purdue.
Yeah.
So it's a job that, I mean, you have a ton of money there. You have a very powerful and rich alumni in Matt Ishbia, who owns the Suns. You have a documented track record of them paying coaches a buttload of money for minimal success. Let's just be completely honest about it. It was one good year for Mel Tucker. And they gave him all that money. And now, they fired him. But we're not going to get too far into that today. So, I mean, from a Jonathan Smith perspective, you're sitting there saying, okay, well, maybe I got to contend with Michigan for in-state talent, and I got to recruit against Ohio State and Penn State kind of in my same area. And now I got to deal with Oregon and USC in my same conference on the recruiting trail too. But you're sitting there looking like, hey, man, this is a team that's been to the playoff. This is a team that just gave the last coach a gigantic contract. And I believe in myself, and I believe that I can have that kind of success here and sustain it, unlike the previous guy was able to.
There is a ton of high school talent in Michigan and Ohio. And the kids in Ohio, or I would even say some in Michigan, who don't get recruited by Ohio State or Michigan, especially now that Michigan's coming off a national championship, why wouldn't they want to go to Michigan State? Especially if they start showing they can have success. Like, it might piss them off that they didn't get the offer from the school they grew up loving. So I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to try to beat you. Mark D'Antonio was known for being a thorn in Ohio State's side. And I think it was Saban in like 96 or 97 who knocked off an undefeated Ohio State and kept them out of the national championship. Michigan State is a thorn in people's sides when they're good. So the other thing too is you also get a lot of money from your basketball program. Like Michigan State basketball, I'm sure generates a ton of money for that school. I mean, one of their new facilities, they just named after Tom Izzo, but it was a football facility. Like, if you're naming something in your football area after your basketball coach, like how much does that read into your basketball school? Right. But I don't think it's quite to the point that like Michigan State fans would be similar to, like, let's say Ohio State having just comparatively to Holtman and now Diebler behind the football coach. Like, you're always second fiddle. Michigan State football doesn't have to be that. When Tom Izzo goes, which could be in the next 5 years, and goes off into retirement, you have the chance, Jonathan Smith, that maybe you make this a football school. I think the door's wide open. I've not been on East Lansing's campus. I don't know if you have, Ryan, but that's a place I'd really like to visit. Yeah, I mean,
it's a nice golf course.
Michigan's a beautiful state. It's an attractive spot, and I think it's going to be really well. Kind of turning into this year beyond Smith a little bit is we talked about their offense. They've got to make improvements, and it all starts the number one position on every team, quarterback. If we look at 2023, Kim, Hauser, and I believe it's Levitt, how you say his last name? Levitt. They combined, all three of them, for about 2,300 yards passing, 14 TDs, 13 interceptions. That's pretty rough.
It's not good enough.
Now, all three of them have since left the program. Kim is now at Coastal Carolina, Hauser's at ECU, and Levitt is at Arizona State. And I just read today, Levitt is expected to be the new starter at Arizona State. Did he push Rashada out the window? That's pretty interesting. So I dove into some stuff for Michigan State spring ball, and it sounds like the quarterback competition is alive and well. They brought in sophomore Aidan Chiles, who transferred over from Oregon State, so he already knows the Jonathan Smith system. So I think that kind of made him the presumed favorite for the job. But apparently, North Dakota transfer Tommy Schuster's had a really nice spring game in spring, and he's a 4-year starter with the North Dakota Fighting Hawks. Now, again, it's a level below, but the kid has experience. So, he could make a push. And again, the end of the day, you at least know you have a reliable backup if something goes awry or an injury happens to Chiles. Kind of on the Chiles front was his spring game is a little bit hot and cold, showed some flashes. He showed some really good chemistry, though, developing with their returning leading receiver, Montori Foster Jr., and then his previous teammate, Jack Velling, coming also over from Oregon State. So just kind of your thoughts, Ryan, on Aidan Chiles, the quarterback room from last year, comparatively so to this year.
Well, I mean, you were just kind of talking about the statistics there, and that's kind of one of those. It really can't be much worse than that. So kind of one of those, well, I'm sure it's probably going to go up, but I like Chiles. I liked him as a prospect. He didn't play a ton last year. Obviously, Oregon State had an entrenched starter in DJU, but he looked good in limited action last year, 68% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns, no picks. And he's a little bit more of a mobile guy, too. I wouldn't say like a straight runner, but guy who has the ability to use his legs. He's a big dude, 6'3", 200 pounds, doesn't go down easy in the pocket, and that is big. No pun intended. So I think he's a guy who can bring a dynamic element to this offense. But they kind of used him the way they kind of used him as a kind of a package guy last year. If the North Dakota kid if he's more of a polished passer right now, I don't see a reason why they can't kind of run that back again this year. Let Aidan Chiles get a little bit more experience, especially moving to a new conference where the style of play is a little different. And then maybe it's a situation where as the season goes along, he gets a little bit more comfortable. Let's see if we can roll with this kid full time now. But a lot of talent. He's got a big arm. We're really excited to see him in the Big Ten here. And, a couple other, you mentioned the kid from Oregon State, but TJ Sheffield coming in out of the portal from Purdue. That was a good player last year, too. So, should have some weapons to throw to. And we'll kind of see what kind of magic Jonathan Smith's able to work with that offense last year, because they sure need it.
Yeah. I mean, we look back at Foster's stats from last year, again, I wouldn't say super high on your receiving stat line, but 43 catches, 576 yards, 3 TDs. Now, that's not Iowa level, but it's certainly not much better when that's your leading receiver. Your next 3 guys who are coming back, not regarding the guys who have left, but Alante Brown, Jerron Glover, and Antonio Gates Jr. Yes, Ryan, we are old enough. I believe that is Antonio Gates' son, who is playing for Michigan State. They're all going to compete for snaps. They combined for 370 yards and 1 touchdown last year. So not a lot back. But one thing we can look forward to, though, is 4-star freshman Nick Marsh coming in. Apparently, this kid had a really great spring game. He ran with the second-team offense. He had 3 catches, 105 yards, with a 75-yard TD catch on the first play of the second half. He's big. He's 6'3", 205. I love big receivers. And his speed, he is really fast, which, again, may have helped open him up on that touchdown catch. He's also a willing blocker, which is something you don't typically see with freshman receivers, and they struggle with till they get used to it. So he can maybe be a factor in the fall this year. Did you look up the Antonio Gates?
Yes, he's definitely Antonio Gates' kid.
Big
news, though. He actually... So he was in the portal, and then a week and a half ago, it looks like he announced that he was withdrawing from it. So it's a big key for Jonathan Smith.
Stan. Yep. Well, one thing, too, with a new quarterback, regardless if it's, the young man from North Dakota or if it's Chiles, is you got to rely on a running game. Nathan Carter returns. He wasn't really used much in the spring game, but looked pretty solid when he was. But he had 798 yards, 4 TDs in 2023. Kind of the lone bright spot on that Michigan State offense last year. Again, not Kenneth Walker numbers, but not many people are going to match that when your offense is that bad. But they also are going to bring back Berger, Mangum, and Prem in the backfield. But they also have true freshman Brandon Tullis that is catching the eye of the Michigan State fans. He's 6'1", 215 pounds. He displays a bruising and unforgiving running style. So again, I love backs who want to line up and just hit you. So this kid, I'm going to be keeping my eye on to see. And here's my last name pronunciation of the day to see if I can do it. Their new running back coach, Keith Banafa. We'll see if that's right. He has a knack for turning 3 stars into studs. Damian Martinez, he worked with at Oregon State. So we can kind of see what he can do with Brandon Tullis here. And then they also bring in a new all-line coach who is also from Oregon State. So big thing, though, their offensive line is going to get a new look. They had lost 3 full-time starters, and then their Brandon Baldwin, Ethan Boyd, Gino Vandemark, and Christian Phillips all entered the portal after Smith was hired, but similar to Gates Jr., they removed their names and they're back. So they're going to get 4 full-time new starters, but they have 4 guys who have experience on the team. So we'll see if Michigan State's offense can take a similar path, hopefully, to what Iowa's does this year and make a step forward if they're going to want to contend in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and real quick note defensively, too, bringing in defensive coordinator Joe Rossi from Minnesota. Big fan of his. I think that's a real smart hire by Jonathan Smith. And again, he's doing good things on both sides of the ball, so I'm interested to see what kind of a step forward this defense is able to take despite kind of those losses that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the defense is, man, they've really taken a hit in the portal. I was talking with, I'm going to mess up his name. Where is he? Matt Sheehan. He hosts Locked On Spartans, and I was talking to him about, kind of guys to keep my eye on the defense, and he had originally mentioned the defensive tackles, and the pairing was supposed to be Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow Jr. However, fast forward a few months, Harmon just committed to Oregon, Barrow just committed to Miami, and their other leading defensive tackle, Zion Young, has went to Missouri. So what a rough patch for them. And they're young and unproven at defensive end is another piece of information he provided me. So now you got to turn the wheel, find something in your interior D-line with young and unproven defensive ends. That doesn't spell a whole lot of line of scrimmage success for you in 2024. But we'll see. And if I can't remember the kid's name, but he just committed defensive tackle from Nebraska today. So they are picking up a piece of depth there, which will be beneficial for them. But rough spring game. Again, guys, this is a spring game, so I don't know what to make of it. But when the offense looked that bad last year, is this some offensive improvement or defensive deterioration? But the offense gashed them on the ground. They had 7 runs of greater than 10 yards, and those were pretty much just straight up the middle. And they hit them over the top, which was 4 passes greater than 20 yards, and they drew an INT on another pass that was a deep ball over 20 yards. So we'll kind of see with the defense. Again, maybe it's just something settling in. Bringing back leading tackler Cal Halliday to lead the linebacker unit. But I was also told Jordan Hall, very athletic, promising young talent, 67 tackles in 23. He's listed as the most talented player in the linebacker unit. So they got the middle part taken pretty care of at linebackers, but just kind of your thoughts on the overhaul defensive tackle here. Like it's such a being if you've noticed any other guys added to it.
No, especially when you're considering the style of football that they're going to have to be going against too. If you're not able to kind of hold down an angle at that line of scrimmage, that's not ideal. There's no
blown off the ball.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, for all the offensive improvement that we're talking about and hypothesizing that they can make. I mean, if you can't get off the field, you can't shut down drives. You're going to let teams run down your throat. That you're not going to get enough opportunities to move the ball. Then the other teams can control the clock on you. So, will be interesting to see if there are anyone already on the roster that's able to step up, or if they're able to kind of add through the portal, even though portal window's closed, but guys who are currently in the portal can still commit to other schools kind of going forward. So will be interesting to see if they're able to make any more additions to offset some of those losses.
They're sitting pretty nice in the DB room, though. Reading about Malik Spencer. He 72 tackles, 6 PBUs last year. Apparently, Spencer's got a shot this year to elevate himself into the first round with a strong junior season. So really nice defensive piece there. He's 6'1", 205, so good size for the NFL. You have Angelo Gross, who also was 72 tackles, 5 pass deflections, and 2 INTs in 2023. Another defensive back. And then Dylan Tatum, who actually lined up at corner last year, is going to move to safety for them in 2024. He had 45 tackles, 7 pass deflections. And I think part of this was Jaden Mangum is now in the portal, leaving. So they also added Angelo's brother, Avion Gross, from Southern Illinois to fill the other safety slot. Now, again, it's spring, so we'll see if these guys are the eventual starters, and we can give you an update that on later in the summer when we do those previews. But DB room's pretty sound. Problem is, you can't get pressure on the quarterback. DBs are going to get worked because they're going to have to be in coverage for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to find a way to get heat on the quarterback to help these DBs out. And then again, if you can't stop the run up the middle, your linebackers are going to get left out to dry because they're just going to get beat on every single game. You're going to see Halliday get 91 tackles again. That's because they can't stop anybody up front. So we'll kind of see how that progresses as the season goes. But my kind of overall take for Michigan State is just a ton of turnover coming into 2024. What expectations we have for Smith, I think we should have positive expectations. I think you're going to be better this year than last year, and I'm sure we'll take a peek at the schedule real quick here. And can these fresh faces on this team get them back to competing for some relevance in the Big Ten? And like we just said, it wasn't too long ago with Mel Tucker and then Kenneth Walker, you were competing for potential of the Big Ten East crown. And in 2015, you went to the playoff after winning the Big Ten championship. So it's there. Can you take the step forward with Smith?
And I think better, too, is a bit of a relative term, and I'm not sure that it's going to necessarily be reflected in the record here because this is a very tough schedule. You got a 4-game stretch smack dab in the middle of the season against Ohio State, at Oregon, against Iowa, and at Michigan. That is awful. That is just horrendous. But then you look outside that, too. I mean, in the non-conference, you're getting FAU and something called Prairie View. So those sound like they should be 2 wins. And if they're not, then Michigan State's really going to be in trouble. Because then going to Boston College, who was a decent team last year for sure. You lose Jeff Hafley to the NFL, but Bill O'Brien coming in. I think they got a pretty good quarterback in Tommy Castellanos. So we'll see what they are next year. But you're going to Maryland in week 2. That's a tough game to start your Big Ten slate. And then after that hellacious 4-game stretch, you got Indiana at Illinois, against Purdue, and against Rutgers. So again, like we've talked about multiple times, just how you feel about that depends on how you feel about the rest of the conference as a whole. When I look at the schedule, I mean, outside of FAU and Prairie View, I'm not looking at a single game on this where I'm looking and saying, boy, I expect Michigan State to win this game.
Yeah.
So it could be one of those things where you go 4-8 again next year, but you feel a little bit better about the direction of the program based on how they play, kind of how they trend.
I mean, with a quick scan over it, I'm feeling confident with Michigan State. I have a secret little love affair with Michigan State. I like Sparty a lot. Maybe it's the green and white. They do have some hideous uniforms that they've came up with in the past. They can leave those, the yellow state across the front of the uniform. You can put those things in the trash. Yeah, those are god-awful. Yeah, they're yellow to colorblind people, so they're god-awful. Put them in the trash. You have way better throwback uniforms than that, or alternate uniforms. Go with the monochrome, like Ryan says. Give me an all dark green. Put the Spartan logo dark on the helmet that's outlined. But anyways, if you're going to assume Ohio State beats them, Oregon's going to beat them, I'm going to expect that they both beat them pretty handily. If Iowa doesn't take a step forward on offense and Michigan State does, you're playing that game at home. That could be a win. And we don't know what Michigan's going to be this year. Is Michigan going to get so beat down early in the year if the Sharon Moore era doesn't start off in the right direction? Michigan State could go into Ann Arbor and steal one. So, I mean, and in those last 4 games, I think it's perfectly viable if they go 4-0. Seeing what Bielema has Illinois looking like and Signetti, but I certainly expect them to beat Purdue and Rutgers. But, I'm kind of on the opposite side. I think maybe you go 8-4 this year, and then kind of see where you go from there. I do. I feel really confident about Jonathan Smith. I think even, 8-4, even 7-5. Be happy with Spartan fans because this could look a lot like last year. Ryan could be very correct. You could be staring at 4-8, 3-9, and 5-7. Let's try to get back to bowl eligibility here. Michigan State is a good football program. They should be at least bowl eligible every year. There's no excuse. So let's get this train moving a little bit here. But overall, this is a team that one of the more teams I'm excited about. I mean, we're excited about the new additions with the teams who have stayed in the Big Ten. I'm more excited to see what Michigan State brings in this year than Iowa. I think just because Michigan State has also shown some ability to have an offense that lives in the 21st century versus Iowa, who still plays Leatherhead style football. So I would like to kind of see what this becomes as we go through this year. Yeah.
All right, y'all. I think that's all we have for tonight on the Iowa and Michigan State front. We will be back on Thursday this week to close up the Big Ten portion of our spring overview series with the mistake on the lake, Northwestern. You already got
a double dig this episode.
Say,
we got a double dig.
That was a low blow. You already got the reference in. I didn't need to do that too.
Man.
We got Northwestern and UCLA on Thursday that we will close up the Big Ten portion of this on. Everyone, thank you once again for joining us tonight. We will be back with y'all on Thursday.